Let's do this. All right, everyone, it looks like it's 11 a.m. So if you're trickling in, all good, but I'll get going with the intro. So welcome, everyone. My name is Chelsea. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from the Move UBC crew. And I am so excited for the next hour because we've had the privilege of partnering with CAYA Health Centre for a workshop on the relationships between body image and movement for this year's Move UBC campaign. Now, please note that this workshop is being recorded, so keep that in mind if you do choose to turn on your webcam or drop in a question in the chat box. Now, before I introduce today's facilitators, I would like to acknowledge the lands that make this workshop possible in the first place. As a hybrid virtual event, I would like to acknowledge that some folks are gathered with me today on the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations at the UBC Point Grey campus. And I would also like to recognize the lands above which UBCO is situated on, which belongs to
we're good.
Okanagan peoples. And both these lands are traditional, ancestral, and unceded. Now, since this workshop is over Zoom, I acknowledge that you might be chiming in from elsewhere. So I'll leave a link below of www.nativeland.ca to check out where you're chiming in from. And since this workshop is all about well-being, it's really important to remember how much the lands we live, work, exercise, and learn on are inevitably tied to our well-being, and to really credit the original caretakers who've taken care of these lands since time immemorial. So in this 1 hour workshop, we have the privilege of picking the brains of the co-founders of CAYA Health Centre, Come As You Are. aka CAYA is a health center that offers a medical and allied healthcare model that provides safe, trauma-informed, gender-affirming, sex-positive services for all women, trans, and non-binary individuals in a safe and supportive environment, all under one roof. And as an interprofessional clinic, we welcome registered dietitian Stephanie Dang to guide you through dismantling diet and fitness culture, providing strategies for cultivating a balanced and mindful relationship with food and movement. And then in the second half, we'll get Registered Clinical Counsellor Dr. Veronica Li to help us explore the connections between body image, self-criticism, and the influence on self-esteem. So I'll pass off the spotlight to these two. Enjoy the workshop.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Thanks, Chelsea, for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, we're so excited to be here today. My name is Stephanie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a registered dietitian and one of the co-founders of CAYA Health Centre. We have lots to talk about for today, so I apologize if we are speaking a little bit fast. We just want to make sure we get through everything. I think if anybody has questions, you can put it in the chat as well. Next slide, please. So for the agenda today, I want to start off with just an overview of the basics. This might be a review for some folks, but just making sure we're all on the same page, kind of the basics of nutrition. We're going to get into diet culture and what that is and what that looks like. We're going to get into metabolism, intuitive eating and how to fuel your body, understanding your relationship with food and how this, involves movement and, things to fuel your activity and post-activity. And because we are talking about, food and diet culture, I do just want to be really mindful of everyone here. If you need to take a break or, take a pause from the presentation, like please don't hesitate to do so. I just encourage that for anybody who, starts feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Next slide, please. So let's start off with the basics. I do want to overview carbohydrates, protein, and fat, but I also want to remind everyone that food is so much more than just these three things, numbers, nutrients. It just, it's so much more than that. It provides joy and comfort and connects people from all over the world. So we'll focus on these three for now, but just a reminder that it's a lot more than this. So first we have carbohydrates, and this is our main energy source. They are our muscles' preferred energy source, our brain's preferred energy source. Also, they taste delicious. We have lots of different types of carbohydrates. We have carbohydrates that are digested a little bit quicker. So these are things like fruit, sugar, things made with white flours, crackers, cereals. These are definitely not, bad. They're just, they do digest a lot quicker in our bodies. And then we have more complex carbohydrates. These take a lot longer to digest and absorb. So these are things like oats and whole grains, sweet potatoes, yams, wild rice, those types of things. These complex carbohydrates typically have fiber as well. And fiber is really, really great for our gut health. I think the gut microbiome and gut health, those are kind of popular topics these days, and just knowing the importance of having a healthy gut. And so fiber is a really, really great way to do that. And certain sources of fiber, some of the ones I just touched on, so like oats and wild rice, but also pretty much anything whole grain, things like legumes, nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables. So these are all great fiber sources as well. Next, we have protein, and protein really just plays that really important structural role in our body. So things like our tissues, hair, organs, nails, skin, etc. Lots of different types of protein for those who eat animal products. We have our meat, fish, dairy, eggs, and then the vegetarian or plant-based sources. We have things like tofu, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, soy products, edamame, plant-based protein powders, etc. And then last but not least, we have dietary fat. And actually the most important thing that we use dietary fats for is actually hormone production. We have lots of different hormones in our bodies, but we have our sex hormones, sleep hormones, stress hormones. And so it's really important to make sure that we're getting enough of these dietary fats to actually support our hormone production. They're also really important for absorbing certain vitamins, so specifically vitamins A, D, E, and K. We need dietary fats to actually absorb these ones. It can be used as energy sometimes, the dietary fats, but we prefer it for like hormone production and absorbing vitamins. And again, lots of different sources, so oils, butters, animal products like full-fat dairy, eggs, nuts, seeds, nut butters, avocado, coconut oil, etc. So those are the three macronutrients, and I also kind of like to touch on these three in terms of hunger and fullness. And so the way that I kind of like to explain hunger and fullness are, let's say you just had one of these nutrients, so either carbohydrates or proteins or fats, it's probably not going to be the most filling. So let's say you just ate a slice of toast or just had an apple. Then if you pair two of these things together, so maybe you do carbohydrates and protein, or protein and fat. So maybe you had, I don't know, a handful of nuts and half an avocado or something like that. You might feel like a little bit physically full for about an hour, but you're not necessarily getting that long-term fullness. When we start pairing carbohydrates with proteins and fats together, this is really where we can start to feel more sort of like satiation. So long-term fullness for maybe about, let's say 2 to 3 hours. So those are using the macronutrients. We have this other sort of fullness pillar that I sometimes like to talk about, which is like almost like mental fullness. And the best way that I like to explain this is, let's say you are at a restaurant and you love mac and cheese and you're like, I really kind of want this mac and cheese, but I feel like I should order this tomato sauce pasta because I think it's quote unquote healthier. So maybe initially you order the tomato sauce pasta and it has carbohydrates, it has proteins, it has fat. So it's technically everything that you would need for this quote unquote fullness. But at the end of the meal, you're still thinking about the mac and cheese, and you're still kind of, maybe when you get home, looking in your cupboards for something sweet. You're not feeling totally satisfied. And satisfaction, that's where like definitely like that mental fullness comes in. So yes, you can have the carbs, proteins, fats, but also pairing it with foods that you actually really enjoy is a super, super important part of both kind of like satisfaction and satiation. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. And this is a question, if you feel comfortable sharing it using Menti, it is an anonymous platform, so you can scan it with your QR code and share some answers, and we can share a couple of them in the chat, or maybe Veronica will be able to share some of them, or if you feel comfortable too, you can also share them in the chat. without using the Menti app. So think about it in the back of your mind of how would you describe your relationship with food? And when I ask, clients this question, it's kind of thinking about like, what are some of the, I don't know, maybe feelings, emotions that come up around food? Is it all positive? Are there, certain feelings of maybe a little bit of anxiety? Or do you think about maybe some subconscious sort of food rules that you have maybe around certain foods? Maybe categorizing them as good versus bad. So just some of these things here.
Yeah, I can share the results as well. So just give me one moment here. I think we have a few in the chat as well.
For some reason, I can't see the chat. Okay, great. Yeah, so complicated, shame-based or survival-based, usually positive, but some sort of guilt, annoyance, lots of complicated. I feel like that's really common, and you aren't alone in that. Healthy relationship with food, but feeling a clear kind of binary, what good and bad is. Some around sports nutrition, healthy foods, but also some balance in there as well. And it's interesting because I do see quite a few words here saying complicated, quite a few words saying guilt. And again, kind of what I was saying, you're totally not alone. I think this is a really, really common thing to have because of diet culture. And so that is the next thing that we will get into. Thank you, Veronica. So what is diet culture? Diet culture is a deep-rooted system of beliefs that basically tells us that thinness equals health and superiority. And this belief really oppresses individuals who do not fit within this thin ideal. And this disproportionately harms women, trans folks, people in larger bodies, people of color, and people with disabilities. It basically is this idea that promotes weight loss as this solution for you to feel better physically, emotionally, socially. And it often results in folks spending so much time, energy, and money trying to lose weight in order to fit within this thin ideal. It's also like a very common way of basically demonizing certain ways of eating and praising others. And this can often result in a lot of like shame around certain food choices. And in some of those responses, I did see some folks share shame, guilt, anxiety around foods. And I just really want you to know like that is not your fault. And diet culture is kind of how we've grown up almost in a way of feeling about food, and it creates these emotions around them. So for the next slide, and kind of thinking about what are some common diet culture beliefs. We won't do the Menti thing again if you want to pop them into the chat, but I will start going through a couple of them. I think a few common diet culture beliefs revolves around like good versus bad foods. That's a really, really common one of, well, when I eat this, I'm good, and when I eat this, it's bad. I hear a lot of this narrative talking about weekends, for example. So I was, quote unquote, really good during the week, but I was bad on the weekends. And it's really this kind of binary thinking of food. Talking about movement today, I think exercising to burn off or earn certain foods is a really common one. Maybe having, a dessert the night before and feeling like you have to maybe go to the gym or do some sort of movement the next day. Limiting an entire food group, so the fear of them being bad. Eating quote unquote clean. I kind of like to tell people like we do not put our food through the dishwasher or the washing machine. So I don't know what eating clean is. Like there's no such thing as like eating clean foods. Extreme panic about pandemic weight gain. I think this is also a really common one as well. Like a lot of fear and anxiety around the weight gain over COVID, and being able to really take a step back and reflect with yourself. Maybe my body really needed this weight. Maybe my body, like this is not a bad thing, and maybe my body actually feels safer with a little bit of additional weight. Also assuming only thin folks have eating disorders, and like the classic, quote of "you've lost weight, you look great," and Obviously commenting on anybody's body ever is like so not okay, but this kind of like really perpetuates that desire to, live in a thinner body. And, people might have the best intentions, but losing weight is not, equal to a good thing. So these are just some common diet culture beliefs that I have. I have one here, cheat days. Yeah, that's another interesting one, kind of similar, going back to like that weekend piece, right? So that's a good one. Okay, so what is our metabolism? Metabolism is kind of this, overarching term for, it does mean the rate at which we burn energy, or quote unquote calories. But it plays such a big role in lots of different things. So like our hunger, cravings, thoughts about food, mood, sleep, hormones, body composition, it plays such a big role in all of these things that we kind of sometimes refer to it as this overarching term. And it really is directly influenced by the food that we eat. It is influenced also by movement throughout the day, but it's mostly influenced by the food that we eat. And so when we are not getting enough food, our bodies actually have this really amazing way of adapting to our environment. And this goes back, thousands of years ago, when we were in periods of feast and famine, when our bodies were able to basically prevent us from dying of starvation. So when we are not getting enough food, we might experience some things such as low energy, extreme hunger, strong cravings, overwhelming food noise, or AKA thoughts about food, mood swings, sleep disturbances, hormonal imbalances, prolonged low metabolic rates. This is when some of our non-essential organs are affected. So things like hair loss, or dry skin, brittle nails, and for folks assigned female at birth, like maybe losing a period or a menstrual cycle. And on the other hand of that, enough food really equates to things like good energy and regular hunger cues, decreased food noise or thoughts about food, generally good mood, good sleep. And I kind of want to just like put a little asterisk here where everybody's like very different. This is not the only, metabolism is not the only thing that's impacting some of these symptoms, but I do find a lot of the time, especially the low energy in the late afternoon period of times, really erratic hunger or cravings, lots of food noise. These are really common things that I will often see in folks who might accidentally be under eating. So how do I know if I'm not eating enough for my body? And again, everybody's so different. So figuring this out takes some time, a little bit of trial and error, and like doing what feels good for you. But a few of the check-in pieces that sometimes you might want to think to yourself is, do I think about food a lot? Sometimes I argue that bored eating and stress eating, I don't know, they're not always as simple as that. I think a lot of the times, like, our hunger and cravings are happening for a reason. And so, if you're finding that you're thinking about food a lot when you're quote unquote bored, maybe that's your body's way of telling you, hey, I didn't quite get enough to eat in the day. So maybe checking in with yourself and being like, do I feel the need to restrict certain foods? Am I getting really strong cravings, maybe for things like simple carbohydrates later in the day? Do I feel out of control around food? Do I have to tell myself the narrative of, oh, I can't buy chips because otherwise I will eat them all, or I have to keep chocolate out of my house, otherwise, I'll feel really chaotic or out of control around that food. Maybe feeling anxiety around social events that involve food, feeling the need to exercise or do some sort of movement after eating a larger meal. And so thinking about some of these things and just checking in with yourself to see, okay, am I fueling my body enough, or am I feeling like some of these aspects of diet culture maybe creep in a little bit here and there? So what are fun foods and why are they important? So this is a cookie analogy that I like to share. So I don't know, maybe just pretend that everybody here pretends that they are doing this in their head. So let's say, just imagine I gave you 10 of your absolute favorite cookies. And I was like, you can have these 10 cookies, but you are never allowed to have them again. And let's say theoretically, there's no such thing as calories or, whatever. So they're your absolute 10 favorite cookies. How many of them do you think you would have? And if somebody wants to pop it into the chat, feel free. They're your absolute favorite, and you're never allowed to have them again.
All of them.
All of them. Yeah, exactly. All of them. All 10, of course. And let's say I give you those same 10 cookies, and I was like, you can have those 10 cookies, but you are going to have them every single day for the rest of your life. So maybe the first day you have all of them, you have 10 cookies because you're like, I haven't let myself have these in a while and they're my absolute favorite. And then the next day you're like, ooh, I just had 10 cookies yesterday. Maybe I'll just have 5. And then the next day you're like, oh, okay, I just had 15 cookies in the last 2 days. I know I can have them tomorrow. Maybe I'll have 3. And then the next day you're like, you know what? I think I'll have 1 cookie. The next day you're like, I want 4 cookies. The next day you're like, I don't want any. I'm going to have them tomorrow. Then you have two cookies, and so on and so forth. But basically the point of that is you're never going to feel this overwhelming need to have all 10 cookies again, because you've allowed yourself to have them the day before, you're allowing yourself to have them in the moment, and you know that they're still going to be there the day after as well. And so you've really taken away this like all or nothing mentality with this food. And it's, you're starting to feel a little bit more neutral about it. You've taken it off of this pedestal. And going back to kind of that thought of, let's say you can't have chocolate or chips in your house because you feel like you'll be really out of control around them, checking in with yourself and being like, am I setting these like subconscious or conscious rules around food where whenever I have chips or whenever I have cookies, I'm like, okay, screw it, eating as many as I can because diet starts tomorrow. Or, well, I've already sort of like quote unquote messed up eating clean. So like should probably just like eat as much of them, and then I'm going to throw them all out and I'm going on a sugar-free, cleanse for the next 6 months. So, thinking and checking in with yourself, am I creating these very like all or nothing situations and environments with these foods, maybe not knowing it? And that's why I'm feeling so chaotic around these fun foods. So fun foods, they're very important, kind of including them in moderation throughout the week. I know that can feel very overwhelming sometimes because it can be so hard to imagine a time where like, you don't feel like you're eating past the point of fullness. But again, I do actually think, working with a therapist or a dietitian can be a really helpful way to kind of work around some of these relationships with food. All right, so before we get into tips for fueling movement, these are just very general tips for fueling your body. Highly variable, please do what feels best for you. But in general, eating every roughly about 3 hours, including some carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And this actually goes back to our glycogen stores. So these are stored forms of carbohydrate that we store in our muscle and in our liver. These glycogen stores only last us about 3 to 4 hours during the day. So, when those 3 to 4 hours are up, we typically get that drop in blood sugar. You might start to feel a little bit shaky, maybe a bit lightheaded, like those really strong hunger cues start to come in. So, kind of a way to prevent that is just eating every roughly about 3 hours. Including fun foods regularly, like what we just talked about. Focus on eating enough instead of restricting, and then doing a movement that feels good for you. So again, these are very general, but just some kind of like summary tips. Okay, so what about fueling for movement? Our bodies need additional fuel for additional movement. Any form of movement is going to, increase the amount of energy that our body needs. I think a really common question that I get are, what about fasted workouts? I think, a few years ago, I think these were really common. And they promised this like ideal of like fat loss and all of these things, but really metabolically it's actually impossible for our bodies to quickly switch into burning fat as fuel. The most efficient thing for our bodies to burn is glucose, so that's the first thing that our bodies will burn, so carbohydrates, and then it'll burn our glycogen stores. It'll start converting our glycogen into glucose, and then it will start burning that. The second place that it goes in something like a workout like this, so let's say like an hour sort of maybe like HIIT workout or strength training workout, the first place that your body actually goes to is burning your lean muscle tissue. So it starts breaking down those amino acids into glucose way before it starts burning into those fatty acids. So it's a really big metabolic switch that our bodies have to do to start burning fatty acids for fuel. So it's called metabolically expensive. Like our bodies don't love switching into that metabolic state. So I always recommend fueling before a workout if that's what feels good for you. And protein, is it really the most important nutrient? We're going to talk more about this in a second. I honestly say protein and carbs when it comes to movement are equally as important. And then early morning movement. So how do I manage those, which we will also talk about on the next slide. Okay, so pre and post movement tips. So pre-movement, we have carbohydrates and fluids. Protein, you don't really have to worry about before exercise. There isn't a lot of evidence that supports that's really beneficial for things like recovery and repair. So carbohydrates are the most important thing. Number one, to give you the energy for the workout, but number two, to actually prevent that lean muscle tissue breakdown during the workout. There's lots of other, benefits of movement, not just building muscle, like, the mental health benefits and cardiovascular benefits and things like that. But with kind of things like, reducing injury risk and promoting repair and building lean muscle tissue, really focusing on carbohydrates before is super important. So again, general, unless you're working with a dietitian on like a specific plan for your movement intensity and kind of like lifestyle and eating plan, in general, the recommendations are about 1 to 2 hours before. If you are doing a really early morning workout, so for example, I work with a lot of athletes who have like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. training sessions, and they're just like, yeah, waking up at 4 a.m. is not realistic for me to have like my pre-workout breakfast. So we can actually optimize the glycogen stores. So as a reminder, those are your stored form of carbohydrate in your muscle and in your liver. We can actually optimize those stores the night before, because overnight those last us about 12 hours instead of the 3 to 4 hours during the day. So you can actually almost do like a mini carb load the night before so that you're not starting from 0 in the morning. So you can actually top these up. So either the night before or 1 to 2 hours before a movement or training session. And some examples, things like peanut butter jam toast or a sandwich, or like a Lara bar, banana, bagels, granola and yogurt, like lots of different types of carbohydrates. But these are just a few examples. After working out or post movement, this is where the two of them come in handy. So we have carbohydrates, proteins, and fluids. These are all, again, equally as important. I think protein is often like really, really promoted when it comes to something like movement. And yes, it is important, but we just don't want to forget about the other ones. We actually get greater muscle growth and greater muscle repair when we pair carbohydrates with protein instead of just protein alone. So that's why I always are recommending the protein and carbohydrates together. So things like, yogurt and granola and fruit, maybe a smoothie with like some sort of protein in it and carbohydrates, like a chicken and rice bowl. And in general, anything within kind of like an hour after working out is super helpful. The last thing that I'll say with the pre and post workout, pre and post workout is kind of thinking of it as, because I think I often get the question, like, is this in addition to what I'm currently doing? And the short answer is yes, because if you have a baseline of, food that is fueling your kind of like baseline school work, like kind of day to day, and then you're adding on that movement, you still need this food, the regular amount of food to sustain that baseline, regardless of whether or not you're working out, right? So if you're adding additional movement, technically the pre and post workout are in addition as well. So again, working with a dietitian can be super, super helpful because it can be very overwhelming to be like, okay, wait, I need to do my breakfast, but then I need to do my pre-workout and my post-workout. And I never want anybody to feel like, they should do something or they have to do this, or like they have to keep track of all of these different, timing of eating. So it's okay to ask for help too, because I do know that it can be a little bit overwhelming. All right, so just finishing up for my half of the slides. So just checking in with yourself around your relationship with food and movement. So for example, do I feel the need to exercise on days that I eat more? Do I feel the need to count calories or macros or, keep track of those things? I'm going to share this quick. I wasn't going to share this quick thing, but I do like to share this because I do find it really helpful just talking about calories and the relationship with food and movement. Calories don't really exist. And I'll explain why, because so the way that they basically count calories is they take a food and they burn, excuse my language, but they burn the shit out of it. And they see how much energy radiates off of that burnt food. And obviously we all know that is not how we digest food. So that is not the exact same way that we are digesting, these calories from food. And so sometimes I find that a little bit helpful to sort of think about when somebody feels really stuck in that calorie counting cycle of starting to just think about ways, okay, maybe calorie counting isn't working best for me. Maybe I am spending a little bit too much mental time on it. So anyways, we could talk more about that later if anybody has any questions, but just a side note there. Yeah, just thinking about like how often you're thinking about food. Do you ever feel like chaotic with eating or secretive around foods? Body checking when walking by a mirror, like avoiding keeping foods at home, otherwise eating them all. So this is just kind of a reminder of like ways you can kind of check in with yourself around that relationship with food and your body. Okay, well, thank you so much. This was the last slide for me. Just a few food mantras I wanted to leave everybody with. So your body size does not define you. You are so much more than a number on a scale or, a clothing size. You don't owe anyone thinness. You do not need to shrink yourself for anyone. You are enough as you are today. Screw anyone who comments on your body or anyone else's body ever. Like, we should know by now that that is just like not okay, but also just like really enacting compassion. And I think remembering diet culture is such a deep rooted system of beliefs that has permeated all parts of society. I think it's so wonderful that you are all here today, but also remembering that, not everyone is as lucky to be able to learn about diet culture and how that's impacted their beliefs and choices. And so I think just like really enacting compassion. If somebody does comment on whether your body or somebody else's body, yes, that is not okay. And that's not an excuse for them, but also remembering that, maybe they haven't had the chance to do the same work that you have. So yeah, that's it for me. I think we're going to save questions for the very end, unless there's any like urgent ones that you don't want to forget. I'll give people like 30 seconds to write them in the chat really quick.
Yeah, we'll make sure to get to them after.
What would be okay, I'll do this one. What is your one key message that we hope everyone takes home? Actually, you know what? I'm going to do that at the end because I'm going to think about it for a second while Veronica is doing her presentation.
All right, great. Such helpful information. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And so, yes, everyone, hi, I'm Dr. Veronica Li. I'm the other co-founder of CAYA Health Centre. I'm a registered clinical counselor and a sex therapist. And today I'll be primarily focusing on talking about body image, self-criticism, and movement. I think it'll be a nice addition to what Stephanie has already shared. And so I will be talking more on the mental health side of things. And so body image, we'll be talking about what did you learn about your body growing up, messages about bodies, certainly our self-talk, our shoulds, the self-compassion that Stephanie was mentioning, certainly wanting to explore the movement and exercise component. And then lastly, body neutrality and acceptance and some key tips and takeaways, because we definitely, I think both Stephanie and I, when we do these presentations, want you to be able to just take a few things and apply them, even if they're really small. Lastly, I think Stephanie already covered the pieces of like sensitive information or feelings that might come up during these presentations. Reminder, this is not therapy, and anything that you share, we encourage you to kind of keep this to be like a private and supportive space. And if you need to take a break at any point, feel free to do so. And so here's I just want to kind of open it up of what messages did you receive about your body growing up? We'll use the Menti app again. I'm just going to make sure that it's on the correct piece here. I'll stop sharing my screen quickly and make sure that it's on the right question. Okay. So I'll come back to my share screen and so just to scan that code. And yeah, maybe I can provide some examples. I think with body image specifically, I think lots of people hear about, they shouldn't eat certain things because, their body will be undesirable, or maybe that you needed to be thin to be considered attractive, all those types of messages. Feel free to write in the chat as well. Do people have the correct, Stephanie, do you mind just trying it out to see if it works okay? Oh, you're muted.
Hey, Veronica, I think it might be stuck on the relationship with food question.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can refresh the page maybe. Bear with me, folks. How is it now?
Still the relationship with food one.
Okay, well, I don't want to maybe play around with this. If people feel free to write it in the chat, or else I'm also happy to share just a few more examples of what this could look like. Yeah, I know this one's a little bit more of a vulnerable question, so I'm happy to just share as well. Let me just go back to sharing my screen. And so some people, I think, again, going back to what Stephanie shared, it's we receive these messages that are often ingrained in diet culture, but I know even just for certain like cultural groups too, it might be more normal or common for family members to like comment on your body, you know, especially around, we just had the holidays, about what things you should or should not be eating. I think that, you know, oftentimes, yeah, someone wrote in the chat, skinny and being tall was praised, fat was shamed. Yes, totally. So I think like that shows up in like really thin being the ideal. And I'm really like glad that someone's kind of bringing up some gender pieces as well, because all those things would impact the way that we perceive beauty. And so what is body image, right? So there are different components. I think initially when we talk about body image, someone might just think of like, okay, how I perceive myself. But there's a whole host of things that comes with talking about what body image is. There are our thoughts and beliefs about our body, how we perceive the size and shape of our body and body parts, how that makes us feel, and then the actions that we perform to check on, tend to alter, or even conceal our body. And so kind of what I was mentioning earlier, body image has lots of different components. So how our society views the following, and this isn't an exhaustive list, can affect the way that we feel and think about our body. For example, potential like gender norms, age. I think that there is an expectation that actually our bodies should like stay young forever. Recently, there was some controversy around Kris Jenner and how she had a photo of her looking her age, but was criticized by the media. So I think, again, there is kind of an ideal of what this person or ideal person is supposed to look like. I think that also comes into account when we talk about abilities and disabilities. In certain cultures, some skin color, you know, being fair-skinned is more desirable, but in others, actually having tan skin is more desirable. And so I think there's so many things that get wrapped into how we perceive what our bodies should look and be like. The other part that influences our body image is the people in our life. So how our loved ones speak to us about their bodies, and how they speak about our bodies. And I think sometimes what I hear from clients is, oh, like, I don't think I have that, like, that complicated of a relationship with my body. You know, growing up, my parents or my family never criticized my body. However, what was modeled to me was that, you know, my mom always criticized her body, and that made me feel like she didn't like our bodies, but our bodies looked the same. And so they did this research study where they looked at, you know, teen girls and mothers who criticized themselves, and found that that actually made a really big impact on their self-esteem, body image, and disordered eating. And so, am I alone? Am I the only one that struggles with body image? No. Body dissatisfaction and image issues can be present across all genders, across socioeconomic statuses, sexual identities, cross cultures, and like I said, across the lifespan. Our body image actually changes. Sometimes I like to frame it as like our relationship to our body image, or our relationship to our body, because relationships are not stable over time. They change, they grow, and they morph. And so just this slide's a lot, but just a few kind of stats around how common this is. So they've done a study with adults and teens and found that about 20% of adults felt shame about their body, 34% felt down or low, 19% felt disgusted by their body image in the last year. We know that social media kind of adds to this as well. And I think that there's kind of two sides, and how I explain it is there's the side of social media that's like, wow, my body does not look like what I'm seeing on social media, and now I feel inadequate, I feel insecure. And then there's another side of social media, which is maybe more leaning on the body positivity side, which is, wow, not only do I feel bad about my body image, but now I like can't even criticize myself because that's supposed to be bad too. And so there's like multiple layers of self-criticism that show up. Lastly, I think not only does this affect cis folks, but also, queer and trans folks as well. And that is actually higher in terms of body dissatisfaction. And so negative body image can influence a whole host of things. I'll be focusing on a few different things today, specifically around movement. But I wanted to highlight that, yeah, our body image impacts our mood, can make us feel anxious, especially maybe even going to like social gatherings. Maybe we're worried about, okay, well, how am I going to be perceived? So it can impact things like sexual desire, low self-esteem, interpersonal problems. And what I'm going to talk about today is maybe some like compensatory behaviors like over-exercising and what that looks like. So self-criticism and body image. Kristen Neff is a researcher on self-compassion and shame. And so when we feel inadequate, our self-concept is threatened. So we attack the problem, which we perceive as ourself, right? I think kind of what Stephanie was mentioning earlier is diet culture is so ingrained. And if we don't feel like we fit into the societal norms, well, then in our minds, it's like, well, it's obvious, and I'm the problem. I'm not fitting in. And so then we attack ourselves, and that shows up through self-criticism. So what is self-criticism? These are a few examples of some self-criticisms that, I hear in my office quite frequently of, I feel fat. This is one of those things is like, fat is not a feeling. This is a thought. I'm not good enough. I should lose weight. I often call it like, are you shoulding yourself, right? Oh, I should do this. I shouldn't eat that. I should be able to fit in these clothes, or like, I should, remove my body hair, like all of those types of things, because body image is not just about weight. I think it's about like so much more than that, right? And so what if they don't like me? I hate my body. And I think the piece of this that I wanted to highlight is like so many of these thoughts feel true, right? When we have those like really negative narratives, it's so easy to feel like overwhelmed by them and truly like believe that that is a fact, when all these things are thoughts. And I'm not trying to say, oh, it's just a thought, like, just don't think about it like that, because not only is that invalidating, but it just doesn't work. And so can we just recognize and be able to label that, hey, wow, like I am like criticizing myself right now. Like I'm having a really heavy self-criticism day. And so how has my self-talk functioned for me? I encourage all of you to take a moment and just reflect on your own like self-narrative of maybe some of the thoughts on the last slide were familiar to you, or maybe like a version of it, or some other. And self-talk is not specific to just body image, right? I know many of you are students, so it might sound like, oh, I should have studied last night, or maybe I shouldn't, I need to try harder. Like, how old is this voice? Whose voice is it? Does it have a function? And is it helpful? Often I hear when I talk to my clients about self-criticism is, well, if I make that part of myself go away, then I'm just going to like let myself go. I'm going to like fail if I don't, talk to myself in this really negative or like self-critical way. I like need that. I need it to motivate myself. Or if I don't, then I will fail. I will gain weight, or I'll stop trying, or I'll fail out of school, or if I don't do this, like my partner won't like me, my friends won't like me. And so oftentimes people share with me that, well, maybe I don't want to get rid of my self-criticism because it helps motivate me. We know through the research that self-criticism can lead to shame and guilt, right? When we criticize ourselves, like, how do you feel? I'm assuming that you feel pretty bad. And bad's not like maybe a very descriptive feeling word, but often it's like shame. We feel inadequate. And shame is actually a very helpful emotion. And many of you might be like, what? Like it feels so painful. And it's like that like sinking feeling in my chest. Evolutionarily speaking, we actually need shame. Shame lets us know that we're going to get rejected by the people we care about. Thousands of years ago, when we lived in smaller communities, isolation was actually a threat to life, right? We cannot survive in isolation or alone. And so we would feel shame to prompt us to try and fit into our group so that we wouldn't get with the body positivity movement, it can feel like, okay, well, I feel bad about my body and the way that it looks. And I also feel bad that I'm feeling bad about it. And so then we have we feel guilty for criticizing ourselves, when in that situation, it's like, okay, well, I can acknowledge that maybe I have some values around self-compassion, but I also have some values that maybe I need to look a certain way, or some values around being accepted that are really important to me. And so I could probably do a whole other talk on shame and guilt, but I won't spend more time on this. But I did want to just bring our attention to the fact that self-criticism can lead to these really painful feelings. And what do we do when we feel ashamed? I want all of you to maybe think about a moment where you felt really ashamed. Embarrassed can be like a lighter version of that. So maybe when you felt embarrassed, what did you want to do? When we're feeling ashamed, we want to hide. Oftentimes people, when they feel shame, we want to cover our faces, or we want to conceal. For folks that struggle with maybe some body image pieces, they might wear baggier clothes. We might wear certain things that might mask the way that we look. We might engage in some avoidance. Maybe we won't look in the mirror. Maybe we want to attend certain social events. We might isolate or withdraw. Some people engage in substance use, or restrict their food, or engage in other disordered eating behaviors. And another way that people cope with guilt and shame with body image is that we overexercise. And so what does over-exercising mean, right? And I'm not here to diagnose, we're not here to say that this is anyone in particular. And compulsive exercise is actually not something necessarily diagnosable, but it is something that the American National Eating Disorder Association coined as one or more of the following. And I wanted to highlight this because it can look really different for everyone. And so a couple of the points is that it might interfere with important activities, or you might be exercising at inappropriate times, setting, or despite injury. Perhaps you've injured yourself and now you are exercising when you've been recommended not to, or it actually might cause further injury. Or maybe you're exercising, I think some of my clients struggle with even going on vacation if they know they don't have access to a gym. And then so that would be life interfering, right? Perhaps discomfort with rest, or, and this one, I think, again, all of the things that I'm describing, it's not a absolute, right? I think exercise can be really helpful to manage emotions when we're feeling really anxious. If we're feeling wow, I'm feeling really angry maybe, or having really strong emotions, exercise can be a great way to help us regulate, help us cope, help us ground. However, if that's the only thing that we are using, then that's where we might get into some sticky spots. Compulsive exercise would also mean perhaps a means of purging, as Stephanie mentioned earlier, used as permission to eat. When exercise becomes hidden or secretive, if maybe someone in your life has shared that they're concerned about your exercising and now you're hiding it from them, or you're doing it in certain times of the night when no one can know that you're exercising. And then feeling as though you're not good enough, fast enough, or pushing hard enough during a period of exercise or movement. And so why do we exercise? I think, as I mentioned earlier, this isn't a all or nothing, but more so we want to be really curious about the intention of reflect on the last time you exercised or engaged in movement. Why did you do it? And what were you thinking about? Yeah, we don't need to necessarily answer this, but maybe just a point of reflection of, maybe did I exercise because I felt wow, I ate a meal larger than I ate more than I wanted, I ate beyond the point of fullness, and then I exercised to compensate. Or did I exercise because I thought it'd be really fun? And so I wanted to share a little bit about our thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations, and actions, and how they're all interconnected. And so here's a couple examples of how this could show up. So maybe the initial thought is like, I should exercise. I feel feel, right? So we might feel shame, we might feel guilt, embarrassed, disgust, which is an emotion that we saw earlier in that research study. When we're feeling those emotions, like we might also notice like tension, hypervigilance. When lots of people feel like anxious even, they might like hold their breath. So we're noticing how that shows up in our body. And then we might engage in some actions, which is like exercising beyond limits, maybe actually avoiding exercise, which would be the kind of like other end of the spectrum, restricting food or engaging in like a binge purge cycle. And then when we engage in those things, like what kind of thoughts would we have after that? Okay, well, if I've exercised beyond my limits, maybe I have the thought like, wow, like I'm such a failure. I didn't exercise the way that I wanted to. And then that's going to make us feel even more ashamed. So we can see how this, like, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, this cycle can go kind of and have like this like cyclical pattern like that. And, you know, with all of these things, it doesn't have to go in this clockwise fashion. We can often just have thoughts and emotions and they bounce back and forth, or we could have emotions and actions. And I share this with us because if we look at this, like, what do you think like the hardest thing to change is? Emotions. Emotions are really, really hard to change. If I could just tell you to not feel these feelings, well, I wouldn't have a job, and well, I think the world would be a very different place. And so, how do we address some of these things? And we'll be talking about this today when I talk about the tips and takeaways. But for us, like bodily sensations are also really hard to change. If I told you to just stop sweating, like that's obviously not going to work. And so, talking a little bit more about how we can engage in actions and thoughts as well. And so some benefits of movement. So we know that there are many mental health benefits to movement, whether that's mood management, anxiety and stress reduction. They've done a study with looking at SSRIs, which is a commonly used antidepressant, and exercise, and that they actually like yielded very similar results of engaging in like cardio exercise, certainly like doctor's recommendations. But we know that exercise helps our mental health. It also releases endorphins, those feel-good emotions or those feel-good hormones, certainly our physical health, our cognitive functioning. We know that with memory and attention, sometimes like engaging in movement or a little bit of movement or exercise prior to studying can help us with our learning. Exercise and movement can also be fun and pleasurable, helps us with our energy, improves sleep, and can help with pain management. This isn't an exhaustive list, like I said. These are some examples, and with everyone, it's a little bit different. And so I talked a little bit about like over-exercising, but the other thing that I find that my clients really struggle with is motivation. Like, wow, when I feel ashamed and I've criticized myself a whole bunch, what is my likelihood of feeling like joy and energized and motivated? Probably not very much, right? Like our motivation kind of tanks, and then we might engage in something like procrastination, which is, oh, you know, I'll go tomorrow. Like I really don't want to go for a walk today, or I really don't want to go to this dance class or yoga class or whatever it is. I'll just go tomorrow, or I'll go later, and then we feel so much shame for not going. I've been there personally. I think many of my clients have been there as well. And so what I talk to people about is that motivation is not like a spontaneous emotion. There might not be a moment where we're just, you know, sitting on our couch or like, you know, out and about and go, yeah, I have a strong need to do this thing right now, like movement or exercise. And for some folks, yes, absolutely. However, for many, there might not be this innate kind of like spontaneous emotion that shows up. So I describe motivation sometimes like baking a cake, where it's really important for us to have ingredients that help us like have motivation like as a result. And some of those ingredients include things like you know, self-compassion and checking in with us, like sleep. If you haven't slept the night before, I don't know, you pulled an all-nighter studying, you're probably not going to feel super motivated and to exercise. And so I think those things are really important to think about. Fueling yourself. If you're hungry, it's gonna be really challenging, again, to find that motivation if you're like feeling kind of sluggish or low energy. And so those are some of those like motivation ingredients. It's gonna be different for everyone. the last kind of piece around motivation, like the sprinkle on the cake, is that motivation actually fuels more motivation. The first 5 minutes of any task are like the hardest. I say this with studying, I say this with working, I say this with movement and exercise. And so sometimes I encourage people just to set a timer for 5 minutes. If we can do it for 5 minutes, great. We'll just like pat ourselves on the back and say, yeah, we did it for 5 minutes, 5-minute walk, 5-minute stretch, incorporating movement in these small ways. And then sometimes after the 5 minutes, if we've had enough, like great. And if not, then likely we might actually go, I kind of like this. This is working for me. I'm going to continue. I hope that makes sense. So what do we do about all of this? This is where like the takeaways are showing up. I'm mindful of our time, so I'm going to try and be as succinct as possible. The first thing is, do I need to be positive? I get this all the time. Okay, well, do I need to just think positive thoughts? Like think that, I'm awesome and my body is awesome and I love it? No. I think for body positivity, it works for some, definitely doesn't work for all. I would say actually lots of people really struggle with this. And so the piece that I suggest instead is approaching like it with body neutrality or acceptance and kindness, which is that self-compassion piece. Because like the last thing you want, I think when we're feeling really low, like down here, telling ourselves that we're awesome or we're amazing, it's like the jump is too far and it's just not believable. And it actually is a little bit invalidating and makes us feel worse. And so self-compassion, we know that self-compassion actually helps us to downregulate our threat response. And what that means, many of you may have heard of the fight or flight response or fight, flight, and freeze. When we self-criticize, it actually activates our fight or flight because our brains are perceiving what we're doing as threatening. If you picture, a little person sitting on your shoulder saying like, you suck all day, that's going to be quite threatening. And so why would it be different if it's coming from like our internal dialogue? And so with self-compassion, there's 3 components. First is self-kindness. Like, would you, speak to a stranger like this? Probably not. Probably wouldn't speak to a friend like this, a loved one, but yet we speak about ourselves like this. And so, one might be just enacting some kindness, common humanity, we're not alone, and some mindfulness. And so I'll put this into an example, which is, okay, let's say I'm having the thought that, I look fat today, or I'm lazy. We might acknowledge like, wow, I'm having a lot of self-critical thoughts right now. We might enact common humanity, which is, I know lots of people are having like really self-critical thoughts right now. Maybe it's around the holidays. Maybe it's around, wearing clothes that, don't fit you the way that you want. And then maybe we can be kind to ourselves of, wow, like, yeah, I'm hearing like how negative I've been. I'm going to like practice some kindness by engaging in activity that I like. Or maybe even just like comforting ourselves. And this is my last bit here on body neutrality and acceptance. Do I need to love my body? So the metaphor I often use for this is like, think about someone that you love. Do you love every single thing about them? Probably not, but you still love them and you still like forgive them when they make mistakes and you're still kind to them. Can we enact the same things with our body? We don't need to love every single part of our body, but we do want to practice some type of like acceptance around it. And so what does acceptance mean? Doesn't mean that I need to like accept all my body parts, but more so, can I accept that actually some of my body parts make me feel a little bit sad and that sadness is okay? And then like labeling and being able to like distance ourselves from these types of like negative thoughts. Okay, that's the end. So thank you all. I see some things in the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I imagine we don't have a ton of time for questions. But I'm happy to stay on her a little bit. I don't know if Stephanie can stay on too, but I'm happy to stay on a couple of minutes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and we can also open up the like anonymous chat as well. Let me pull that up.
Oh yeah, Gia had I hope I'm saying that correctly, question for both of us. So what would be your one key message that you hope everyone takes home? Maybe we can start with that one. Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this one. I think the one key message is to really kind of like eat in a way that feels good for you. But I think that's the hardest part, is figuring out what is actually the best way for me without any diet culture involved and without listening to the other noise and other people's opinions, and truly like, what does that look like for you? So yeah, I hope that kind of makes sense, but that's what I think my one would be.
Yeah, key takeaway. I want to say like acceptance as an overarching theme of like accepting the emotions that we have, and that like going back to that like self-criticism piece of self-criticism. Like if it was helpful, I would say yes, do it. However, we know through the research, and I think through all what my clients share with me, it's and personal experience, it's not. And so sometimes I think the like phrase that I remind people of is like, is this helpful? And I think it can apply to like many different things, not just body image or movement, but is what I'm doing helpful? Is it moving towards the things that I want and are important to me?
Mm-hmm. While we're waiting for some additional questions, I realized we didn't really share too much about CAYA, so maybe I'll take the time while I wait for some questions to come in and explain a little bit about what we do. So CAYA, C-A-Y-A, stands for Come As You Are, and yeah, we're a medical and multidisciplinary health clinic providing comprehensive care to all women, trans, non-binary folks. That being said, while we do, focus on these folks, just knowing that they have generally been, marginalized and discriminated based on gender, we do not turn anyone away. Like, we accept people of all genders. And we have a really comprehensive team. So we do have medical doctors who provide things such as IUD insertion removals, genital pap testing, contraception counseling, STI testing. You can find a full list on our website. And then we also have a full team of allied health professionals. So registered dietitians, clinical counselors, pelvic floor physiotherapists, ortho physiotherapists for kind of injuries in sports, registered massage therapists as well. So it's kind of, our vision was to have a really one-stop shop for people to get all of their healthcare needs taken care of. Our medical services are covered under MSP if you have a BC Care card, and then our allied health services. If you have extended health coverage, I know UBC sometimes has really great coverage depending on if you're enrolled or not. We do direct billing with most of the major insurance providers, but otherwise they are private pay as well.
Oh, and for those of you who don't live in Vancouver, we also have virtual services. So if that is not accessible to you, then we can definitely offer that too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you for sharing that in the chat. That's our website and Instagram along with the UBC links as well.
Yeah, any other lingering questions?
We have a question over here.
Okay.
Chris, what's your question?
So part of my work is helping personal trainers motivate clients in healthy ways. And I loved your cake motivation analogy with things like, manage your state, your sleep, get started for 5 minutes. Are there any other like good key ingredients to a motivation cake that you could share?
Yeah, great question. One, I think like it's so personal based on like each individual. So I think even asking like, whether it's asking yourself or asking the clients that you work with of, what motivates you? Like, is it thinking about, goals? I know for lots of people, rewards can also be like incentives. And I think we have to obviously be careful with that, is then the motivation can be external, but sometimes like that's okay. If that helps us get those first 5 minutes, then, we can kind of get the ball rolling a little bit. And I didn't really finish the cake metaphor, because I think sometimes we could do everything right and we still don't feel like doing it. Same way with baking a cake. You could follow the instructions to a T and sometimes your cake sucks or doesn't taste good. And so I think that's another place to enact like some self-compassion, because sometimes like those days are really challenging, and like criticizing ourselves even more actually just like, again, creates more like of that motivation delay and procrastination versus, yeah, maybe I can just acknowledge today is a hard day for me and I'll try again tomorrow. I hope that answers your question.
Great. I don't think, we have another question. Yes, what's your question?
Would you have any advice for people who tend to graze and how to distinguish that from snacking? And sometimes it's hard for me to tell, like I tend to eat several small meals throughout the day. because I get very full very fast, but then I get hungry. But then to other people, it looks like I'm constantly snacking, or it looks like I'm dieting. But then for myself, I often am wondering, am I overeating because I'm constantly eating?
Yeah, really great question. Almost like a two-parter to this one. Number one, I think, yeah, checking in with yourself and is like, does this feel good for me? Like, do I feel energized? Do I feel like this doesn't disrupt my day-to-day life too much? Like, is this working for me? Like eating small meals during the day, there's definitely nothing wrong with that. Sometimes, and again, this is very general, like a guideline that I'll tell folks is eating every roughly about 2 to 4 hours tends to be a little bit of a sweet spot. So for example, if you're noticing that you're consistently feeling really hungry less than 2 hours after a meal or a snack, and then again, if it feels good for you, adding a little bit of extra, like all three, carb, protein, fat at your previous meal, and seeing if that makes you feel a little bit better and lasts you maybe 2.5 hours. There's definitely nothing wrong with eating small meals throughout the day, but sometimes I find when somebody's feeling like hungry every hour or every hour and a half, then I'm like, okay, maybe let's check in, make sure you're getting enough protein, getting enough carb, getting enough fat at each meal and snack. But yeah, it's very dependent on the person too. I know like a big theme of all, like both of our sessions was really like checking in with yourself and seeing what feels good for you. But yeah, so yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Any other questions in the room here? Great. I don't think we have any other questions, so I'll pass it over to Chelsea.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Veronica and Stephanie for hosting today's workshop. My camera was off, but I was snapping my fingers the entire time. I feel like my relationship with food and my own body is always a work in progress. So I'm so excited to now implement what you've taught us today. And again, thank you to all of our participants for attending today. Remember that February is Move UBC month. So in addition to this workshop, there are many other free opportunities to get moving. And here at the Point Grey campus and the Okanagan campus. So you can head over to our website that I dropped in the chat. And if you're at one of the in-person viewings, it's lunchtime. So I believe catering has arrived. And so you're welcome to pick up some food, nourish your body, and stay and debrief, or you can also pack it up and take it to go. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and happy moving UBC.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Yeah, and if you have any lingering questions, Chelsea's going to send out our contact info as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll send out the recording like afterwards too. All right. Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Have a good day. Okay, I'm signing off.